We are talking all about the skin microbiome today and the connection from the gut, but also hitting things on the actual skin as well. And I really appreciate our guest's approach. Her name is Dr. Barbara Paldus. With a PhD from Stanford, her passion for innovation is matched only by her mission to enhance lives. She began her founder journey at Picaro, inventing a leading greenhouse gas detection system, then at Finesse Solutions, advancing biotech equipment for vaccine production, and ultimately finding herself on the other side of two successful exits, holding over 50 US patents. In 2018, driven by her son's severe allergies to mainstream skincare products, she founded Codex Labs, developing biotech plant based solutions for nearly every skin condition. Now, Barbara's using everything she's learned to launch the first ever dermatology telehealth platform, bringing quality, all inclusive skincare right to your door. So, what she's going to share is her son had eczema, and she went after exiting those companies. She had this, really big journey with all that. And really, obviously, she's quite smart. She has a PhD from Stanford and really went on a huge deep dive of understanding how that all works. And wow, I mean, as somebody who is coming from that background, I mean, she can speak on this stuff as well as any naturopathic doctor I've heard. So, really appreciate that. It's going to be very informative. And just educating on what they're doing is helping develop the gut, right? Helping make sure there's not leaky gut, helping drive down inflammation in the gut, but then also at the same time working on the skin barrier and the health of the skin microbiome for anything from eczema to psoriasis to acne to rosacea to I said acne. What was the other one? Menopause. Yeah, we hit on all that. So we're going to go through all those, and I think you guys will learn a lot. So let's go ahead and get into it. Here is Dr. Barbara Paldus. This episode is brought to you by Peluva. So Peluva, Peluva, those are Mark Sisson's new zero drop minimalist shoe with that distinctive 5-toe design. I have been loving them. I've been a longtime fan of barefoot shoes, and I was very resistant to the little 5-toe articulation personally at first, because just being real, I thought they looked really nerdy. And I was like, oh man, yeah, I love Mark so much and I get what he's doing, but I'm not wearing those nerdy shoes. And then Brad Kearns, who's also involved with that project, was like, no, Tara, you got to try them. Tara, you got to try them. Tara, just come on, try them. And I tried them, and I kid you not, I enjoy them so much that I actually like how they look now. Weirdly, I can tell. So like the purpose of that 5-toe articulation is so that your toes can move more dynamically. So with other barefoot shoes, like I've been a long time fan of Vivos, and I'm still a big fan of Vivos, but they have just that big toe box, right? Which is awesome. So I didn't really feel like the 5-toe articulation was necessary, to be honest. But as I've worn them, I have experienced how awesome that is. It was actually been quite surprising for me. And I wore them this morning. I wear them all the time, and I'm really, really enjoying that freedom of movement on my toes. So, Brad and I have been going back and forth. I'm like, dude, I actually love them. And he offered to sponsor the podcast with Peluva and also offer you guys a 15% off code, which I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I will gladly introduce my people to Peluva shoes. So you can use code Coach Tara at peluva.com, or you can just go to peluva, peluva.com/Coach Tara, and you can get that 15% off discount. Make sure you snag some of the socks while you're there, because you're going to need the toe socks. Okay. All right, let's get into the episode. All right. So, Barbara, can you share with us, before we get all into the skin microbiome, can you share with us how you got into the skin gut brain connection?
So it started with my son, who had contact dermatitis, which is an allergy to a very common preservative called phenoxyethanol. It's in over 90% of personal care products, everything from our body washes to our lotions, creams, serums, expensive products, not expensive products. And that triggered atopic dermatitis, which is basically eczema. And so I spent a good part of his childhood trying to avoid using corticosteroids. My mother was a medical doctor in the Czech Republic, and so she was coming up with all these holistic types of managing everything from the flares to the dehydration to the flakiness and diet. She was huge into diet. And that's where I started understanding the importance of the gut microbiome. Not that she actually knew or had learned in the 1960s about the gut microbiome. She just knew about fermented foods. She knew about, a balanced diet, the colors on your plate, and all that stuff. And so I made a ton of organic baby food. And over time, the eczema subsided, and we were lucky that we didn't have any of the typical allergies like gluten allergy or dairy allergy. And at the time, I was working a lot and traveling a lot. And he was diagnosed when he was about 8 or 9 with ADHD. I didn't know that kids with eczema have a 50% higher risk of also having ADHD. And that has to do with genetics and genetic factors. They also have a much higher likelihood of asthma and ear infections, but fortunately, we didn't go through that. And when they get a lot of antibiotics, for example, for their ear infections, that trashes their gut microbiome from a very early age. And so, um, we dealt with it with food, but I think there's a lot to be said, for kids' probiotics, et cetera. And we can definitely touch upon that later. So, long story short, traveling too much. He had high anxiety. His psychologist told me he was suicidal and I needed to sell my company. So I sold my company. We were working in vaccines, we were working in monoclonal antibodies, cancer therapies, basically biotech. And I ended up at home not knowing what to do. And then I thought, you know what? Maybe I can help moms like myself and people with eczema. I also have mild eczema. It just doesn't flare that much because, again, I try to not stress, I try to exercise, I try to sleep, which is not always easy. But basically, can I help people with eczema? And then he started developing acne. So we kind of added acne to the list.
Wow. Okay. So can you tell, I listened to your TED talk and you shared how, you started with coconut oil when he was a baby for diaper ointment. And then can you tell the story of how you kind of evolved your potions, so to say?
Exactly. So my mom was also like, you need to take B vitamin and you need to grind it up and you need to put it into the coconut oil. And so we had these pink lotions. So he was actually like getting these pink diaper creams, but apparently it helps reduce inflammation and it helps reduce the skin. And then as I was traveling, anytime I had some time off from work, I would go to all the local stores to see what handmade plant-based non-phenoxyethanol balms I could use. So we were mostly looking at things that didn't contain any water because then they didn't have to have preservative. And that's where I ran across a little store in Cork, Ireland, and the stuff worked really well for him. They had an oil. And so when I sold my company, I heard that they were going out of business because she had gone bankrupt. And so it was like, oh my God, I need this oil. So we basically bought the company, and that's how we started. They had Irish naturopaths, Irish botanists, and they started teaching us about plants. We started doing more and more research into plant cells, how plants have co-evolved with humans, how we can use them to, modify gene expression in our skin cells, possibly our gut cells. And that's kind of how the whole Codex story started, is we started doing all this research. We now have partners who make, biotech, plant-based ingredients for us, actives, and we started looking at how do you combine these plants? What have people done? So now we have plants from Ireland and Europe. We have plants from Patagonia. We work with the Mapuche tribe down there through basically a company. And we also looked at Ayurveda for acne. And we're looking at Chinese traditional medicine for some other things that I can't talk about yet, but are coming out in September.
Cool. Okay. So you're saying that our bodies interact with nature better than synthetic chemicals?
Well, what I'm saying is that plants have a very complex set of chemistry. And since we've co-evolved with them for,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of years, our bodies take them up far better. Now, that's not to say, there are plants that have toxins. And so in some cases, for example, with comfrey, we have to eliminate some of those elements that, chemical compounds that are not good for us. But most of the plants that we work with, they also have special, like there's usually one cell in that plant that's the really like hard workhorse for that plant. And if we can isolate that with biotech, then we can get something that's very pure, doesn't have, anything that could be potentially toxic, like pyrrolizidine, for example, and in comfrey. And so then we don't have to worry about filtration because we're not getting the whole plant. And with biotech, we can just make tons and tons and tons of this material. We don't have to worry about sunshine. We don't have to worry about harvest. That was actually a big issue during COVID because there were fields of plants that went unharvested. So then there were shortages. We don't have to worry about the weather mostly, and more importantly, we don't have to worry about heavy metal contamination in the soil. We don't have to worry about pesticides. So, kind of
Hmm.
biotech is to me the way we leverage nature
Hmm.
without, in a way, using up too much energy, using up, land that could be used for preservation or food, and is very, very pure.
Thanks. Yeah, being in like the holistic functional space, like I feel, in the last 10, maybe 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of awareness of how inflammation in our gut, how our gut can impact our skin, right? But I feel like it's only maybe in the last 5 years or so that we're really focusing more also on the skin microbiome itself, and I mean, you're in this world, but like there's still like quite, I would say, I think the majority by far, at least in America, is still not really thinking about how the things that they're putting on their skin, they're using like dial soap or, these harsh soaps, like that there's an actual microbiome of the skin. And that also matters. Can you talk? We can get in the gut and all that, but can you talk just about the skin microbiome itself?
Absolutely. So we have a skin barrier. And so there's what's called a chemical layer. So that's essentially the skin oils and the microbiome. That's kind of the top layer. Then there's the stratum corneum, which are really the skin cells, the corneocytes that are kind of starting to, they call it cornification. They're just starting to dry up. So, but it's kind of like the shield around the
Mhm.
body. And then you have the other layers that are kind of underneath it. And so the skin microbiome is a huge part because it's our first defense system. First of all, those poor bacteria absorb UV first, right, before it hits our cells. But more importantly, they're there to provide antibacterials for the bad bacteria. So things like Staphylococcus aureus, staph infections we talk about, or worse MRSA, right, which is the methicillin resistant staph, or E. coli, or whatever, if we're gardening, whatever it is that we're coming in contact with. So our microbiome protects us against the pathogenic, the bad bacteria that are out there in the environment. It also takes the hit from pollution. And only after things pass through that microbiome do they hit that stratum corneum layer of our own cells. And so, obviously, that layer is important to make sure it has the right pH so that the microbiome has to have a certain skin pH. Ideally, it's between 4 and 5. So if you're putting on, as you said, very harsh cleansers or surfactants at a pH of 9, 10, the bacteria don't like that. That kills them. Now, the skin microbiome is very good at coming back, but as we saw during COVID, for example, where everybody was using hand sanitizer all the time, there comes kind of a tipping point where the microbiome says, I'm done. And that's why we were having cracking hands, bleeding hands, dry hands, because A, we were stripping all our natural skin oils. We were stripping the ceramides, we were stripping the sebum from the top layers of our skin, but also with the alcohol. So we were basically drying out our hands, but we were also killing the microbiome.
Mhm. Okay, let's hit on while we're still talking about this aspect of it, like let's talk about acne, for example. What can you share with us in terms of the skin microbiome and acne that people might want to understand?
So acne is caused by Cutibacterium acnes. So that's where we get acne from. But it's not just the bacterium. And so people need to realize that there is a genetic component to it. There are the things in the body that lead to the overproduction of oil on the skin from the pores, from the hair follicles, of the sebum, what we call it. Those that can be driven either by androgens, so hormones, but acne can also have a component which is called follicular keratinization disorder. That's basically that your pores plug up because there's an excess of dead cells in your pores. And so they basically plug up, and then the sebum builds up, basically, the oil builds up inside the hair follicle. And with the bacterial colonization, the acne goes crazy, and basically, you get inflammation, and that inflammation looks like a pimple. If the inflammation of just the sebum kind of coagulates. It's kind of just there, solidifies. You get a blackhead or whitehead. Blackhead is just a oxidized whitehead. So we have to look at things like environmental factors, for example, pollution in the environment. And in China, they did studies where when the pollution goes up, for example, in the city, 2, 3 days later, people break out with acne. There's the hormonal factors I mentioned. So either driven by biological changes, puberty, adolescence, pregnancy, menopause, or things like polycystic ovary syndrome, or hormone and stress. Also, stress can actually impact hormonal factors through cortisol. And then we have all the lifestyle stuff that, I tell people, look, we can give you skincare, we can give you some supplements, but if you're not sleeping, if you're eating junk, if you're stressed all the time, if you're drinking too much coffee or Diet Coke and you use tobacco and alcohol regularly, there's not much, you're causing 80% of your problem.
And then, okay, so let's say we have, I think you said your son started getting acne when he was like 13 or something, right?
Yep.
So, okay, we've got an androgen, the sebum is being overproduced. They're raging. I have 3 boys.
Raging hormones.
I
Yeah.
tell, I'm like, you guys are on the juice right now. So real easy to build muscle. But so like you're in that, you're going to go through puberty. There's not much you can do about that. Right. But,
Exactly.
if there's young men listening that are dealing with acne, like what might you tell them in terms of, because they're probably like looking at every single infomercial type ad and, every medication, from the more holistic space, what would you recommend they do about that? They can't really change the androgen excess, but what can they understand about their skin microbiome and helping it not get
Absolutely. So
infected?
the first thing, and this is my biggest challenge with my son, so don't laugh, is wash your face once a day. Like, get a gentle salicylic acid based cleanser, preferably a scrub, and just wash your face. Like, we went days and, have you washed your face? I don't need to. I'm tired. I'm just going to bed. So, keep clean pillows, keep clean towels, and wash your face once a day. I would say don't pick. Obviously, don't pick your pimples. We hear that all the time. There are now spot treatments that are gentle. They're not the benzoyl peroxide, which can bleach, your pillow, and then you're wondering, well, what is it? If it bleaches my pillow, what is it doing to my face? And so there are sulfur-based spot treatments, and they take, 1 to 2 days, and the pimple goes away. So just put it on, and then you can forget about it. You don't need to cover your face in pimple patches either. Let your skin breathe. And that part is very simple. And then honestly, it's, try to control your sugar intake, try to control your fat intake. So don't eat at McDonald's every day. Don't eat chocolate bars every day. And it might be, easy for us to say as adults, but for teenagers, when you have all this peer pressure,
Mhm.
pretty much, hey, let's go out, let's go do this, let's go do that. Let's go to 7-Eleven, let's go to McDonald's. It's hard, to basically say, hey, why don't we go somewhere else? So just try to incorporate, again, um, antioxidants, berries, um, fruit in general, green leafy vegetables, even if it's a dinner at home, try to eat a healthy breakfast. Diet's going to have a big part of it. And that's why we actually developed a probiotic, which is great for men and for um, basically young teenage males and also teenage females who have the same dietary challenges.
Mhm.
And that contains Google. And Google is actually an Ayurvedic herb. There have been studies dating back to 1994 where basically it was basically used as a hypoglycemic, so it basically helps control sugar, but more importantly, the glucosterones help control cholesterol. Cholesterol is a precursor to these androgen hormones, which are raging in your body, and it not only reduces intestinal inflammation, but it basically helps reduce the overall kind of cholesterol levels in your body and hormone production. And so it was similar, actually. They ran a study for nodular cystic acne, which is kind of the worst acne you can get in a teenager. And they compared it to an antibiotic, tetracycline, and it showed similar efficacy. So that's one of the components we have in, for example, our probiotic supplement. And then we have, the right species to make sure that basically we can help the gut, and we can essentially reduce inflammation in the gut because acne is an inflammatory condition. We can help with what's called the short chain fatty acid production to, again, not maintain kind of, I would say, intestinal integrity, so kind of prevent leaky gut. and lower the blood lipids. So, and then we have green tea in there, which is a great anti-inflammatory again and an antioxidant. So we're just trying to lower the overall level of inflammation, lower the amount of cholesterol, help balance out, digestion of sugars, so that if you are going to McDonald's and you're going to basically eat that chocolate bar, it's not going to cause a breakout the next day.
Okay, cool. Okay, and let's shift over a little bit more to eczema since that was your starting point and we kind of left people hanging there a little bit. Okay, so from the gut to the skin, like every to me, well, most people are listening on audio. I'm trying to make like little hand symbols of things going in and out and in and out. Like everything in the body is like impacting everything is impacting everything. Right? It's just like such a paradox. Like when you zoom out and you're like, oh my gosh, it's like too much to keep up with. But that's how I look at all of these things, right? It's like the gut stuff is impacting the skin. What's happening on the skin is also impacting it. So with eczema, can you share maybe a similar approach? Like, what can people do? And then how do the Codex products help with eczema?
So, eczema can be both a skin and a gut barrier issue. So, we're seeing a lot of people who have eczema also have leaky gut, which I would have never expected, like when we started this journey 6 years ago. And so, on the skin, basically, the compromised barrier lets things like allergens, toxins, everything from pollen to, allergens like fragrances in a detergent come into your skin, trigger your immune system, and this impairment of the skin barrier is probably because once your skin starts becoming permeable, like basically it lets things through, that causes inflammation, and the inflammation breaks down the skin. So you kind of have this vicious cycle with the disrupted skin barrier. And also, typically, your microbiome gets disrupted when you have eczema. And so you don't have as many of these antimicrobial peptides, and you also don't have as much of what's called natural moisturizing factors. So that's why people with eczema get this flaky, scaly, very, very dry skin, which is also itchy because the allergens then trigger these two inflammatory molecules, IL-4, IL-13, which is what a lot of the biologic drugs for eczema try to then suppress. So they basically suppress that immune response. And so if you have eczema, for example, you want, again, pH matched skincare moisturizer, so slightly acidic, this pH of 4 to 5. You want things that are occlusive, so they basically seal the moisture in. You want things that'll bring moisture into your skin. Ideally, you would have something that also helps support your skin microbiome. Obviously, you have to have fragrance free. You don't want to be triggering those allergies. And so preservatives become something that oftentimes we see with kids, for example. People put a standard product on them and they complain that it burns. Know that very well from my son. And so what we were trying to do was kind of add the attraction of the water to draw it into the skin. That's the humectant part. So there we use hyaluronic acid. We wanted to fill the gaps between the skin cells to soften these plaques and kind of prevent the dehydration. So that's the emollient. So that's sunflower oil is actually a fantastic anti-allergenic oil. So that kind of forms the basis of our formulation. Plus, there's also colloidal oatmeal in there and ceramides to fill in the ceramides because a lot of people with eczema don't produce enough ceramide in their skin. And then what we didn't do is do an occlusive, like that's where people use like petroleum jelly or silicone or beeswax. But we do have our basically our system for preservation, which is a lactobacillus ferment. So it's based on lactobacillus ferment of coconut, and then that takes care of the bacteria and the fungi. And then for things like yeast and molds, we have a little bit of potassium sorbate and a sodium benzoate, which is used in food. So in fact, you can eat the skincare product if you want to. It's actually only uses ingredients that the FDA considers as generally recognized as safe, so grass. So not that you want to eat our skincare, but I'm just saying you can. It's that safe. So
Right.
if you put it on a baby, you can't prevent the baby from sticking its hand or feet in its
Hmm.
mouth. Like my son used to stick his feet in his mouth all the time. So that's why we made it edible. So as I mentioned, the sunflower oil is really important because it also increases the skin's production of ceramides and it supports the skin barrier and it's also anti-inflammatory. And then we have in there things like calendula, which is an anti-inflammatory, comfrey, which stimulates the production of filaggrin, which is the skin protein that holds the skin together, and this natural moisturization factor. And then we also have Habrolea, which contains myconoside, which helps stimulate the production of collagen. So again, we're trying to rebuild the skin barrier by stimulating the skin cells to actually do what they're supposed to be doing, and they're not. And that's kind of how that part works. And then for the leaky gut, we found that you need to actually fix the intestinal barrier. So again, the intestine has your microbial layer because you have a gut microbiome, your biochemical layer, which is the mucosal lining, the physical layer, which is the cells, and then you have your immunological layer underneath. But basically, most people have a leaky gut, so we have to fix the gut lining, and then we have to improve kind of that tight junction between their gut cells because they're not just leaking through their skin, they're also leaking through their gut. And so any undigested food, again, toxins, bacteria that make it into their bloodstream will trigger this massive immune reaction. So we've got to seal them up from both ends.
So you're saying there's an oral supplement that you take in addition to the cream that you put on the areas that are showing as eczema.
Exactly. So we have a prebiotic and we have a probiotic.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And we need the prebiotic because
Hmm.
usually we need to fix the mucosal lining so that the
Hmm.
probiotic can actually work the way it's supposed to.
Right. Nice. Okay, I'm gonna pick some up. My 14-year-old has had some eczema popping up, and that makes me. And by the way, his brother. We just moved here back to Utah from Hawaii, and Hilo Bay. There's issues with staph because there's certain bacteria in the soil, and they come into the rivers, and if it rained, they go into the bay. And my older son is a big time, jump in the ocean, cliff jumper, and he got staph. And then sure enough, the one that had the eczema immediately got it from him. Right. So this has been a little bit of a journey recently for us. So I'll definitely pick that up. And it makes me ask the question because I think this is kind of a typical area. Like, so he gets it kind of like right in actually, he was getting it like all over his scalp, right? Like he had eczema. So if it's, and he has long hair, like to his shoulder. So if somebody has longer hair, right? Because this is a thing, I'm getting all these like local medicinal, like made in Hawaii, like, really strong oils and stuff. It did help, just even locking in the moisture like that. But obviously there's a little more work to do with the gut and all that. But my question is for him, it was like, okay, cool. So you're going to take a shower, then we're going to put all this greasy stuff all over your scalp. I'm like, bro, you have to do it. Just, it's okay. Like, we're not going anywhere. In terms of if there's eczema like on the scalp like that, like, what do you recommend in terms of like your stuff? Like, would you just do it overnight and then wash it
I
out?
would do it overnight because
Okay.
otherwise they're going to be tortured and
Right.
they don't want to go to school like that. They don't want to
Yeah.
look like, the John Travolta days are over.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. That's what we're doing. But I'm going to pick some of that up because, obviously we're just locking in the moisture, but you have all these other things that are helping like fix the issue, you know?
Honestly, like we see some people just take the supplements and their eczema pretty much goes away. And so
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like to me, I would have never expected the gut contributes about 60 to 70%.
Yeah, I've had a lot of clients with eczema and psoriasis, and it's heavily impacted. But I wouldn't say like even with them, even with us, testing their stools and repairing the gut function, like they can still have some flare ups. And I don't know if that's only because like we haven't totally restored the gut lining yet, or if it's coming from that skin microbiome angle. But just being real, like I'm like, there's more to it than just the gut because I've had clients on extensive gut healing. We've consulted with the ND, we've done all the thing they've been doing for a while, and they're like still having little flare ups here and there. And that's when it kind of really opened my mind. I'm like, I think there's like the skin, we got to really account for the skin microbiome too, and not just the gut when there's already like active psoriasis and eczema going on. So I appreciate that you guys are hitting it from both angles like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're trying to basically, and you're going to laugh, but one of the most beloved products that we came up with is a soap. It's actually based on traditional Irish soap making. The biggest difference is we didn't use animal bones. We used shea butter and cocoa butter. So we basically adapted the process. It's a cold process. So we actually never elevate the temperature. We let the lye react naturally with the fats. And we load it up with excess shea butter and cocoa butter, and they convert so that the soap actually has super fat. So it has a pH that's close to 7. So it's not like your typical alkaline soap. There's no surfactants in it, and it has over 20% glycerin. And so
Mm.
basically that does not dry out your skin. And I know some people when they first use it, because we're so used to like Ivory or Dove, and you're like, wait, I don't have this squeaky clean feeling.
Tight,
Yeah,
right? Tight,
that's
dry skin.
bad because that means you've stripped all the skin oil from your skin and you've probably
Right.
stripped your microbiome too. So it's the first microbiome, like non-microbiome stripping soap. That's also vegan. And so once you get used to it, it's actually really hard to go back because it doesn't dry out your skin. So you can pretty much within a day or two, you can feel the difference after you use it. And it's for face and body. So men can handle
Cool.
that too. Like I know my husband, if there's more than a soap, like what? You mean I need to use a face wash? That's not happening.
Right. Keep it simple. Yeah, totally. Oh, I appreciate that. I had acne when I was a teenager, and I remember finding glycerin soap because I would get it like on my back, and I hated it. And glycerin soap like really was a game changer for me. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I'm like, okay, yeah.
And that's funny because you weren't stripping the oil from your back, and therefore you weren't driving inflammation because when your skin gets stripped, it wants to compensate. So the more you
Right.
strip it, the more oil it produces. So that's why you're
Yes.
getting acne.
Yep. Even as an adult, I was, in my 30s, I was still getting like facial acne sometime. And it was just some sweet friend who she worked at like a medical spa or something. She was just like, I think like less stripping. Like let's put a use jojoba or olive oil. Like see how you react to that. It was like it changed my life. I was like, oh, I was just stripping the crap out of my skin and it was overreacting. Got it. So yeah, I've lived through what you're talking about right now. Okay, so I also noticed on your website that you guys have products for menopause. Can you tell me about those? What are you doing there?
We do. So I'm 54, so I kind of
Yeah.
developed that for myself. And as you kind of hit above 40, maybe you start losing collagen. And to be honest, it's probably above 35, but it accelerates because we develop so much reactive oxidative stress in our body, right? We're not sleeping properly. Oftentimes, elderly parents, children, we build up cortisol, we have chronic inflammation. And so, what that does is it pretty much starts deassembling our collagen in our skin. And that's why we start aging. That's why our skin starts thinning. That's why we start looking older. So, what we've tried to do is create both a supplement, which is also very useful for eczema. It supplements with the amino acid L-histidine, which allows the body to rebuild this filaggrin, the structural protein, and this natural moisturization factor. Because also with menopause, as we lose estrogen, our skin becomes dry. So we're trying
Hmm.
to basically keep the skin remoisturized. But we also have a serum with the same antioxidant because it reduces the oxidative stress, and we see the skin naturally restore its collagen. So it's really
Nice.
cool that in about 2 months, you can go from like a collagen level of a 65-year-old to a collagen level of about a 45-year-old. And if you're 45, you go down to kind of 25. So you can take about 2 decades of collagen breakdown out of your skin.
Mm. Yeah, appreciate that. I work with a lot of peri and postmenopausal clients, and I definitely see the dry, itchy skin thing is like it can be actually like really bad for health because it can really disrupt sleep. So are
And it's
all
the same in eczema. So what we tell a
yeah.
lot of menopausal women is just buy the eczema lotion, buy the soap. It won't strip your skin and you can rehydrate anytime. Like I get the super itchy shins. Now, part of that's my eczema, but part of that is age now. And I just can feel overall, my body's just drying out. So as the estrogen's going down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and real quick, you mentioned this, and I just want to be clear on the over-the-counter eczema stuff that you see you go to Target and it's like this is for eczema or lotion or whatever, right? You're saying it's basically what I'm hearing. It's kind of like everything else, like kind of Western medicine vibes. It's providing immediate relief by suppressing the immediate symptoms, but it's actually making it worse over time, right? Because it's
So, biologic drugs, which is for more severe eczema, they suppress the immune system. The stuff you get, for example, at CVS, Walgreens, or Target, it
Mhm.
has colloidal oatmeal, so it just
Okay.
soothes the itch.
Okay.
And then they have, basic things like hyaluronic acid, some ceramides in there, but
Okay.
they're older formulations and they're not formulated to actually stimulate the skin to fix itself. You can think of it
Right.
as you have a wall that's kind of cracked and has holes in it. They just fill in the wall.
Yeah.
They're not making the bricks stronger. They're not actually
Right.
having the bricks create the mortar in between. So, um,
Okay.
yeah.
Are you saying the medication people will get for eczema is like a corticosteroid? Is that
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be doing that,
And
y'all. Don't
I'm
be doing
I'm
that.
I'm on a mission to eliminate that because
Oh man.
they are not good.
Good.
No,
Yeah.
especially for children. So we're trying to now do
Yeah.
basically Well, we've done clinical trials where we can basically show that we're as effective as corticosteroids without having to use corticosteroids because the
Yay.
long-term side effects of corticosteroids, we know skin thinning, we know, stretch marks, but you can
Well,
also get perioral dermatitis, like, the rash kind of around your mouth,
mhm,
steroid-induced rosacea, delayed wound healing. Like and then for kids, they can develop Cushing's, growth suppression. I mean, it's
mhm.
it's not great. And obviously
Yeah.
topical steroid withdrawal syndrome, which is horrific.
Well, and even, they when your cortisol has been suppressed for such a long time, now your immune system is actually suppressed. And so you can start getting allergies worse, and then it can actually impact your sex hormones. Like it can wreak havoc in your body, and I see that. I do Dutch testing, which is urine and saliva, cortisol, and then other sex hormone metabolites. But I see that. Like I just had a client just from Flonase, just from an intranasal
Wow.
corticosteroid. Like I was like, what is going on with her? Why she's young too? I'm like, why is her cortisol so low? And I really believe that was the biggest hitter. She also had some other parts of that, but she had been using that daily for years. So I made a post about that. I'm like, don't use this. So I'm glad you guys are coming up with solutions, because then it's like, okay, well, I still want need help. So thanks
Exactly.
for
So we're trying to just eliminate the need for corticosteroids. Like there might
right.
be a flare that's so massive that you need to use it. But again, people need to know it's something that was designed to be used for 3 to 5
Every
days,
right.
not for 5 years, 10 years. Like we see
Right.
people who've been on like stronger and stronger corticosteroids over
Mhm.
15 years and then they get withdrawal and then their body just like the immune system goes crazy. I
Mhm.
mean, and
Mhm.
it's that the skin just basically it starts cracking and oozing and bleeding. I mean, it's just
Mm.
I feel for anyone who's developed TSW. It's just
Mm.
awful.
Wow. Well, yeah, thanks for coming up with these solutions. I love that you guys are going both to the gut and the skin at the same time. That's so smart. And I wanted to give rosacea a moment because, you guys have solutions for these things, and, these are things people really suffer from. They don't want to have rosacea. So what can you tell us about rosacea and how you guys are helping with rosacea?
So rosacea basically it's those like red small pus-filled bumps and small visible blood vessels. Sometimes in later stage rosacea, you can kind of see those on cheeks, forehead, nose.
Mm.
Some people mistake it for acne because they're these small red bumps. But basically, we don't know the exact cause of rosacea. So
Mm.
there are obviously abnormalities in the facial blood vessels. Many people with rosacea have Demodex. So these are these microscopic like mites. They kind of are white and have segments in these little legs, and they live kind
Wow.
of under the skin. They kind of bury
That's
into your skin. Yeah.
disturbing.
Yeah, so then you have to basically get basically a medicated cream.
Mhm.
Some people can develop it because they have H. pylori or they've had several H. pylori bacterial infections in their
Mhm.
stomach. So basically,
Mhm.
that's again the inside out. And some
Mhm.
people have some protein, basically infection protection protein malfunctions. The protein's called catheliticin, but it's usually mostly women again, usually over 30 with fair skin. It's treated again like acne and everything else. People throw antibiotics at it, the tetracycline, doxycycline, which again, I'm not a fan of because some people are on those for 6 months and then, they don't have a gut microbiome left by the time they're done. Some people throw very strong azelaic acid, niacinamide, and the problem is that the flare-ups keep coming back. And so we actually ran a study with the same supplement that we use for um, eczema because it has this M3 antioxidant. And we actually saw 45% reduction in rosacea just with the supplement, which tells us there's definitely a gut-driven component. We also saw most of the people had gut inflammation. A lot of them had leaky gut. So that tells us again, okay, we've got to take a look at the contribution of the gut here. And
Mhm.
then we basically use the same line right now that we have for menopause because it restores circulation, microcirculation. And so it reduces redness. And so you can basically use that to, in a way, recover your skin barrier. In a way, it's also pollution shield, so you're not going to get the flare up from pollution. And we're working on actually a rosacea product specifically for rosacea that where we found a South American ingredient that I think should work as well as some of these medications. It also can kill this Demodex mite. And so far we're seeing, really, really good results with it. We still have to run a clinical trial. So we run clinical trials on everything before we put it to market. That's why it sometimes
Nice.
takes us 3 years, 4 years to get a product out because we really want solid
Wow.
results. And then we, do the supplement, the topical separately, then we put them together. We want to make sure that the synergy is real. And for us, if it's less than 80% improvement, we don't put it on the market. We're a little
Wow.
bit, I'm an
Nice.
engineer, so I'm a little bit anal
Yeah.
retentive about that.
Wow, amazing. Okay, and so just in case you guys didn't catch it in the intro, it's Codex. Is it Codex Labs Core Lab? Codex Labs Core, like CORP.com, right?
Yep.
That's where you would direct people to. That's where you can
Or
get all the
Amazon,
stuff.
or Amazon. It's easy.
Or
If you type in like Codex Labs into Amazon, then
okay, cool. That will make everybody
we can't
excited.
beat Prime, so we just gave up and went on to Amazon too.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, cool. Well, you talking about you being an engineer kind of brings me to my last point though, because I told Barbara before we started, I'm like, I'm fascinated by you as a human because can you tell them a little bit of your backstory? You've got like 50 patents. Like you have just done some really cool things in your life. Tell them a little, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but I'm curious, like, a lot of people kind of sit with like they have these dreams and they have these goals and and they sit on it for the rest of their lives till they die. um, but like the level of creating and going and doing and building the thing, I know your engineer brain is kind of wired that way, but like, can you tell me a little bit, tell them a little bit more about what you've been up to and your, what'd you say, 52 years, 54 years?
54 years on the
50,
planet.
well, you've done some cool stuff in 54 years. You
Seems
tell us.
like 200 years, right? So
I mean, it seems like it would take 200 years. Like, tell them a little bit more about what you've been up to before even this.
I have a degree, PhD actually in electrical engineering from Stanford. My first company, Picaro, which is still around, Picaro, does analytics. So basically, they measure everything down to even parts per trillion, parts per billion. So they look at everything from climate change gases, isotopes in climate change gases, like carbon dioxide, methane, plus all kinds of industrial process gases, monitoring methane for gas lines to make sure that houses don't explode. So they have these little automated cars now that kind of drive around measuring natural gas levels in neighborhoods.
Mm,
And then from there, I went to building a company that made automated equipment for manufacturing vaccines, for manufacturing monoclonal antibodies, so basically cancer therapeutics. So we worked with all the big pharma companies, from Roche to Genentech, Amgen, Novartis, Bristol Myers, et cetera. And our equipment actually that Pfizer bought in 2017, 2018 was what made COVID vaccines. So that's kind of, we also made equipment
mm,
for J&J to make Ebola vaccines. So to me, that was really cool. Also looking at, for example, women's breast cancer drugs, et cetera. And then I had to sell that company when my son was diagnosed with ADHD because I was traveling too much and I was kind of really one of the key drivers in the company behind sales. Because if you're small and you're dealing with a, mega billion dollar pharmaceutical, they want to talk to the CEO. Like they're not just going to give a $5 million order to the sales guy or the saleswoman. So I ended up having to travel around the world. And literally, I was going like this week is in India, then I'm in Europe, then I'm back home for 2 days, then I'm going to China, then I'm back home, then I have to go back to Germany. So it became too much for my son. And so this is my third company. And Usually I was really stupid, and so I wrote non-compete agreements, and then they were enforced for like 3 to 5 years. So I had to completely change industries. So I kind of went from, okay, this is what I did my PhD on. I know this. I'm one of the best in the world in this. It was called cavity ring non-spectroscopy, to, okay, I can't do that anymore. I've done that for 10 years. What do I do now? Okay, I'll go into biotech, relearning everything. Building it over 12 years, selling it, and then having a 5 year non compete, going, okay, what do I do now? And then taking the biotech, learning about plants, learning about gut microbiome, skin microbiome, and creating Codex. So I guess every 10 years, it keeps me young because every 10
yeah.
years, I'm back to ground zero and I know
Oh my
nothing. And you
gosh.
kind of feel like you're that student in college, kind of going, oh my God, how do I learn all this stuff? And so it
Wow.
just reminds me, my dad always used to say, I think it's a quote by George Bernard Shaw, maybe, but progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. And so that's kind of been, you know, that's been my motto. And, it's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they're difficult, which is one of my favorite quotes from Seneca, who is an old Roman philosopher.
Mm,
And that's pretty much how I live my life. Nothing's impossible if you're willing to really work at it.
wow. Okay, so you resonate with the Stoic philosophy a bit
I
there.
do. And, my parents came from the silent generation, and it was like nobody wants to hear you complain, so, shut up.
Interesting. Okay, so you got a little bit of like Navy SEAL in you or something. Okay,
Well, no,
wow.
I was the 4-year-old who, when I fell on the road, because I was skipping and my parents told me about 10 times, don't skip, you're gonna trip and you're gonna hurt yourself. Of course, I couldn't stop skipping. It was a beautiful day. I skipped, I skinned my knee. I started to cry. I had one look from my mother and I read in her face, if you cry, I will really give you something to cry about.
Oh
And
no.
from that moment on, it was like, actually, it's not that bad. I don't need to cry. So I've only saved the crying for the
Interesting.
really, really tough parts in life.
Interesting. Okay, so you have this like brilliant engineer brain. You don't sweat the small stuff at all. You don't even sweat like the medium large stuff.
There's so much of our lives that are not in our control, right? Like starting with our relationship. So there's this thing of acceptance, right? And in a way it sets you free because you realize I can't control everything. Maybe I can influence it. If I try really hard, it's like with our kids, right? You give them the framework, but what they do with the framework, that's out of your control. Like
Yeah.
some kids really run with it, some kids don't. And you have to be there and you have to be supportive. And I'd say that's where my son really, really changed my perspective on life. And I'll never forget the day he was born. And, you read all these books and you think, I didn't babysit that much as a kid. And you're sitting there with this newborn baby and you're like, I don't have a clue what to do. And so I
Yep.
apologized to him. It was like, I'm really sorry. Your mom's probably going to be kind of crazy. I'm not going to be like a lot of the other moms. So I'm really sorry about that. I know you didn't pick this, but I'll do my best. I'll always be there. I'll always love you. I'll always support you. And that's kind of all I can do. And I've been trying to live by those tenets. Sometimes it's hard,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
it's not that
Yeah.
complicated.
Man, I think you really summed it up with the anything is possible mindset. I mean, I hear that over and over from both our mindset teachers that come on the show to other people who have created big things in their life. It's like it's that I hear that that's 100% on. It's not like they're, telling themselves or you're like, yeah, I think it is, but deep down I actually don't. It's like, no, I'm 100% there. I actually really live and breathe. Like, of course it's possible. And I think there's a certain level of self-worth that has to be in place too, meaning you're not really thinking about self-worth.
I
That's
think that's the thing. Like I tell people, they're like, "Oh, you must have so much self-confidence." And I said, "Oh, no, I have like massive imposter syndrome most of the time." Like even on this podcast, like, do I really know enough to be talking,
oh my
as an
gosh.
authority about this stuff? No, I'm
Oh my
serious.
gosh.
But then you realize I'm just going to do my best, and
Yeah.
that's what I expect from people. That's what people can expect from me, Don't
Mm-hmm.
lie, don't cheat, just say it how it is, and at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
it will work out.
Yeah.
So, and do your best, like always do your best. And I would say with starting things, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Because if you don't get your hands dirty, if you keep just theorizing or dreaming, you've got to get your hands dirty and just dive in.
Ooh,
And
elaborate on get your hands dirty. This is good.
so if you're starting something, say you want to start, whether that's a salon or a spa, if you're thinking about it while working your day job, maybe you just need to say, okay, I'm going to do this in the evenings. I'm going to find myself a job where I'm going to learn, if I really want to do
Mm-hmm.
this. And you might decide, I really love this. I want to do this. And then you take the leap and you open up your own salon, or you go, oh my God, this is not what I thought. I don't want to deal with people. I'd much rather be doing my day job. But then and you've made
Right.
an informed decision. And that's what I mean by getting your hands dirty.
Get into action, like experience it, get in all the way and jump in. Yeah. I'd say from like the top performers that I've worked with to like, maybe they played in the NFL or they're, political high up and, running for something in their country or blah, blah, blah. I'd say that's what's high, really high and the highest performers that I've worked closely with is their action side is really high. Like they're actually they're not perfectionists. They do have really high standards, and they want the best, but they're willing to just dive in and go into action. It's like that commitment to actually doing, versus being stuck in this like fantasizing what I'm hearing, this analysis paralysis and thinking about it. Like they don't spend very much time there.
Exactly. I mean, they do their analysis, they make a
Mm-hmm.
decision, and then they either go for
Yeah.
it or they don't. And
Yeah.
looking back now, for example, with the work we've done in eczema and all this plant stem cell stuff, I mean, I didn't know if it would work or it didn't, but I had
Right.
to try it.
Yeah.
And when we got our last clinical results, I think the whole company was in shock because they were way better than we expected. And then now
Nice.
everybody's like, well, how did you design it? And how did you figure this out? And we're all kind of like, we
It,
don't know, but we worked really hard. We made our best guess and it worked out. Like,
yeah.
that's the honest answer, right?
Yeah. 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 And I appreciate you guys doing that because it's like there's so many things that make sense in theory, but then you got to find out, and you got to find out on a lot of people, not just one person or two people, So I appreciate you guys doing that and having that kind of commitment. It kind of reminds me of, do you know the guys at Seed? Do you know our
Yes.
cats? They're kind of that
Yeah.
that same kind of way of being. It's just like, well, like this should work, but let's make sure it works. And wow, it actually works better than we even thought. Yay!
Exactly. Exactly. And
So
they
yeah.
were pioneers. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your insights. And you can definitely rest any imposter syndrome aside. Like you have done your homework. And I mean, it helps that you're obviously like slightly intelligent if you have a PhD from Stanford. So it helps, that you're able to put it all together because this was incredibly informative, like even more than I was expecting. So it was just so much, so info packed. So thank you so much. Yeah, it was awesome.
I'm so glad.
And then again, anywhere else to steer them towards besides Amazon and codexlabscore.com?
So
Any?
we have PTSD from COVID where we had to pull out of stores. So we've pretty much stayed online. And
Okay.
that way we
All
can
right.
just guarantee like Amazon,
Right.
it's really hard to beat Prime, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just look up Codex Labs on Amazon and you will be set. All right, Barbara, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Coach Tara. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Inside Out Health Podcast. I hope it's been helpful to you in your journey. If you think that it might be helpful to someone you know, please share it with them. Please share on social media. It really helps me grow the show and reach more people with these amazing messages. And if you could be so kind as to rate the show and possibly even leave me a review, that really helps. So much thanks in advance if you do that. And yeah, please subscribe if you want to hear more of this type of content. I have lots of amazing expert guests on the way. All right. Thank you.